first time I saw it, I think it was probably in the 1970s, and maybe some of you older guys probably are familiar with it. But you know, it's as relevant now as it ever was. You know, it's like you have how the customer explains what they want, right? How the project lead understood it, how the analyst designs it, how the programmer wrote it, you know, with the thing hanging down, how the business consultant describes it with a big lazy chair in it, you know, how the customer was charged. And then this is really what they wanted, you know, and that's what, so, you know, Scrum's all about like defining what is most valuable to the customer and delivering that. And anyways, it's pretty funny. So this is I gave this presentation to the management team here at HSC when I first started, because one of the things that Brian wanted me to do when I started was introduce this framework. Roman and I worked over at Baker Hughes, and we had like 47 sprints, and we worked among there was, I think, like 11 or 12 Scrum teams of 8 people each, and they worked. We worked. Some of them were in the Netherlands, some were in Russia, some were in Texas, and then we had our Scrum team here in Albuquerque. But so that's, you know, so when I first started over at Baker Hughes, the first thing they did is they brought in a company called Constructs, and those guys spent 2 weeks with us, training us on how to you know, implement and execute Scrum, the Scrum framework. So that's what I'm going to try to share, and I understand that you know, this is supposed to be sort of a working discussion as well. If there's anything that you guys want to add or, you know, discuss about, that's perfectly fine with me. So maybe you guys are familiar with the Standish Group. What they do is they look at software projects, development projects throughout our industry, and they've reported on over 50,000 projects worldwide. And in 2015, these are statistics that come from the 2015 Standish report. And what it's showing you is that as your project size gets smaller, then there's a more likelihood of success. And that's kind of what, you know, Scrum and the sprints is all about, is reducing things down small enough so that they're manageable. This is another set of statistics that also comes from the Standish Group. These are numbers that are a compilation between 2011 and 2015. What they do here is they're comparing waterfall versus agile, and I've highlighted in green the agile side of it, just to point out that, you know, that between the two, across all sizes, an agile development project, which is what Scrum is all about, it's a derivative of agile, is going to be more successful across all project sizes.
Scott, what is challenged? What does that mean?
It means that you succeeded in what you were trying to create, but, you know, for whatever reason it took longer than it should have. You know, you had lots of problems. The customer wasn't happy, you know, throughout the development.
So the customer challenged, or I'm just trying to.
I mean, you know, complete outright fail is where they just stop the whole project, right?
Okay.
And you're not going any further. Challenged is you continued on with the project, but you suffered from not hitting your deadlines and.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And so the the Standish report has come up with these, what are these, 12? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 success factors that that they've determined based on their research of what constitutes what success, and of course the number one is going to be executive support. You need the management to buy into what you're trying to do. Emotional maturity, the skilled staff, and down in here, what I wanted to point out in here was also that you have an agile process of some kind. And, it doesn't say waterfall, it says agile. So, does anybody know who this guy is? Crazy looking dude. Dr. Winston Royce in 1970 was the first to describe waterfall in an Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers proceedings. And he wrote this paper, and it was the paper that everybody, they read like the first few pages and go, oh, that's a great idea. I think I'm going to use waterfall. But they never finished the paper. And really, at the end of the paper, it's a short paper. It's not much bigger than the Scrum Guide. At the end, what he was showing was, here's an idea that I have on how to develop software, but there's areas of improvement, and he was presenting this out for feedback. But people took it and ran with it. They're like, yeah, that's a great idea. And this is what we think of as waterfall. And a lot of the old guys are going to recognize all these. Even at Intel, you guys are.
Thank you.
Probably doing that. I didn't say you, but hey, so system requirements, and so all of these are isolated tasks, and you finish one, and then you throw it over to the guy in the other cube or whatever, down to the next: analysis, design, coding, testing, operation. And
guess what? There are many IT departments that still follow this model without even realizing it.
Yeah. And Scrum, really, when you're in a sprint, when you're working, you're executing, kind of in this way, but in a much smaller scope. So, if you read to the end of the paper, this is really what he was describing. You have the fundamental waterfall process going on here, but then there's all this other documentation that supports the process, and then there's these critical releases and all this other stuff that's going on. And if you were to implement this, then this is how you work, then you might be more successful, but that's not what people are doing. And so, who are these guys? Now these are like modern nerds. On February 11th through the 13th of 2001 in Snowbird, Utah, 17 people with diverse views on how software should be developed met to discuss, eat, and ski. And I think they probably did some drinking too. There were representatives from Scrum, Extreme, DSDM, Adaptive, Crystal, Feature-Driven, Pragmatic. So it was a diverse group of guys that got together to discuss how, they built software. And they all figured they all had, very different views on how things should be done. But what ended up happening is they realized that even though they had different versions of their agile development, they all had similar principles and values. And so they developed this methodology that prescribes these four values, 12 principles that govern what and how frameworks like Scrum should operate. And so Agile you know, is at the center, and then you have all these other frameworks that kind of snap into the values of Agile. And so they came up with this manifesto, the Agile Manifesto. Individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, responding to change over following a plan. In my discussion in the management meeting, I wanted to point out this right here, customer collaboration. You guys probably know this is hugely important, but even Royce knew, you know, when he was developing the waterfall methodology, he knew that customer collaboration was important, but he didn't see it. He saw it happening only at the end of the process, not throughout the whole working of your development. And so then the 12 principles, and I'm sure that a lot of you have probably seen all these. And the number one is to satisfy the customer. And, you know, where Royce, you know, would develop his requirements at the very beginning, you know, what we expect, what we want in Agile is to embrace this change. We know things are not going to, you know, things are going to change, requirements are going to change, and we have to be able to adapt to that. And delivering working software, business and development must work together. There's this notion of collaboration. And so then this is where this comes to Scrum. So it's a framework with which people can address complex, adaptive problems while being productive and creative. And when we say Scrum, we think process, but Scrum is not a process. It's not a technique or a methodology. It's a framework. Then you hang those sorts of things on it. You know, you have a method for doing something, or a process for doing something, or techniques or tools. You use the framework, you implement the framework into your development, and then you hang these techniques and methods, you know, on it. You use it within the framework. So I also figured out why they call it Scrum, but I'll skip that. So Scrum has a theory. It's empirical, meaning that it asserts making decisions on what is known and experience results in accurate knowledge. And as each Scrum iteration is completed, is it evaluated and used to predict what is done in the future. So you don't come up with these calculations to try to figure out, how much can we get done in the next, 3-6 year. You use your historical data to figure out what your velocity is, how much work you can get done, and then you base what you're going to do in the future on how much you got done in the past. So empirical, it's transparent. The work to do in progress and done must be visible to those responsible for the iteration, and observers must have a common understanding of the work the team is doing, meaning, your customers or your managers or, And then inspection. During each sprint, inspection is a key activity to ensure that all Scrum artifacts and work performed to achieve the sprint goal are not introducing undesirable variances. And if you do see that that's happening, then the framework is designed so that you can make changes. Adaption. And then the other notion is iterative and incremental, which I'm sure you guys are familiar with. So what is the framework, the Scrum framework? It consists of roles, events, artifacts, and then these rules that bind them. And the one thing that I didn't say in the management meeting was that Scrum, it's easy to understand the framework. You know, it's only like 17 pages, but it's very difficult to master it. And we had this guy that trained us from Constructs, and he acted like a Star Wars Obi-Wan Kenobi or something. That's the way he viewed himself. And when he discussed this stuff, it was kind of funny. He had a little bit of a sense of humor about himself, but you know.
See the
Scrum.
Scrum.
Curious, so you guys, I'm assuming, are you a developer?
I'm a software engineer.
Okay. So you do the Scrum. I mean, do you guys have like a Scrum Master that's their only responsibility?
Yeah,
To
and
enforce that?
I am the Scrum Master.
Okay.
I mean,
you're a developer and a Scrum Master.
and it can be like that, right? You can have the developer as your product owner. You know, it's okay for the Scrum team to have dual roles, especially when we don't have a dedicated product owner. Brian is acting as our product owner, which is a little iffy.
That's
there.
a little scary, isn't it?
Yeah, your functional manager should never be your product owner, but hey, there's the reality of things too. So,
but Bob, it would almost be impossible, or you would almost be a very large organization to have a single focused person who is nothing more than a Scrum Master.
Yeah, no, that's what I was wondering. I think HSC is a medium-sized company or whatever.
Yeah.
That's what I was wondering if you guys had a Scrum Master or not.
Yeah.
I can tell we're a little bit bigger. We do have people dedicated just to be Scrum Masters. That's all they do, but they have multiple projects, not just one project. So I was just kind of curious how you guys are organized.
I mean, I would be interested to see what they do how do you fill an 8-hour day with 15-minute meetings?
Well, I mean,
there's much more to it.
yeah, they're doing planning games and all kinds of stuff. I mean, and again, they have multiple projects. They probably got 5 or 6 projects on their plate. So it's not just a stand-up meeting.
Right, I know, and I know that we have a lot of meetings, which, to be honest, from my standpoint, as outside looking in, I went, how is it that a bunch of developers created a process that has this many damn meetings in it? Like that just totally goes against everything that I would think that a developer would want to do. I still struggle with the number of meetings.
Well, what are the meetings associated with Scrum other than the stand-up?
Well, the stand-up is just one piece. No, there's refinement, and there's sprint planning, and there's...
Yeah, I'm going to get to all that.
But yeah, there's a lot of meetings in order to do Scrum well, and it's not just the stand-up. I think that's where people get, when you think, yeah, you just got the 15-minute daily, but there's really not. There's far more than that.
And that was sort of in the invitation to this presentation, it was, are you Scrum or are you Scrum-like? And there's a lot of, that's what we used to discuss over at Baker Hughes all the time. And we had 8 guys on a team. One guy was our Scrum Master, but he was also doing development. So even when we had 12 distributed teams of 8 guys each, one guy was the Scrum Master, but he was also doing development at the same time. But the other side of it is the Scrum Master is not just planning 15-minute meetings. The Scrum Master has a lot of responsibility. It's finding techniques to for effective product backlog management, helping the Scrum team understand the need for clear and concise product backlog items, understanding product planning in an empirical environment. These aren't just words. These are things that, if you were to follow this as tightly as you could, you would find that, your development process you know, be tight.
Sure, I mean, you know, Scrum Master is really just project management, if you think about it. I mean, it's kind of a newer title for what these call project managers, and that's essentially what they're doing. You know, project managers used to, you know, fill a day up with work, you know, back when just like, you know, they weren't doing real work, but they were.
There he goes. I knew he was going to get there.
Well, I would respectfully disagree with that.
Would you? Because I had the same feeling.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
I was a project engineer for years and years and years at Rockwell. You know, and a lot of what you're describing, we did in that environment. Now, this was in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, keep going. You disagree. Why would you disagree, just out of curiosity?
Well, I mean, you know, to disagree, I would have to go through and you know, you know, the Scrum Master is a coach. He's trying to keep the team focused on reaching the sprint goal. And
Well, no, I support what you're saying. I understand Scrum Master does a lot of stuff. I guess my point was, so did the project manager. Project manager did the exact same type of stuff.
well, you could also call the product owner something like a project manager as well.
Possibly, yeah.
It's kind of splitting up the roles. So like
Yeah.
the traditional project manager did both roles. So that's what I feel.
Yeah.
I think you're splitting those two roles up into Scrum Master and product owner. Because the product owner is just concerned with what the team is doing. Scrum Master is just kind of trying to keep the team on task and kind of help out and guide the team and do whatever needs to be done to get them back to what they're supposed to be doing. Or help them out if they need if something is in their way, you know, if someone's blocking and stuff like that.
That's what the
Yeah,
Scrum
my
Master
experience
is.
been the
Right.
product owners typically from the user side. At least that's been my
Yeah, they
experience.
decide what gets put out. and
Right.
what-
Whereas the Scrum Master is more on the development side. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah, more so, yeah,
Yeah.
but it's not necessary because it's, you know.
And he's acting as an interface between the development team and the customer as well, the Scrum Master. He's teaching the people outside of the Scrum team, you know, what to expect and you know what responsibility they have to the team.
Setting expectations.
What I'm finding is, as you know, in my, I'm really like a triple threat role because I write code, I act as the functional manager, and I'm the product owner. And my role is yeah, as much as I would love to be able to sit down and take my the director of business of the business operations to be able to step in and truly take a functional, you know, role in this. She's not interested. She doesn't have the time, and we haven't been able to make it, you know, valuable yet to her. But in time, maybe we will. So that's why I'm having to take on, you know, as the product owner, I'm doing a lot more liaison with the business unit. You know, because it can't be the business person, right? In many companies, you aren't going to get a business person that's going to jump into this the way you want them to.
Well, and the other thing is in our case, we need, you know, in Scrum, there's only one product owner. You don't have multiple product owners. You have one person responsible for the backlog. And this causes a problem as well for us. So, let me...
Keep going. This is, I'm enjoying this.
I think I just messed it up.
Don't let that computer get the best of you.
Let's start. And so this is my presentation on Scrum.
Hey, when that happens.
Okay. So the framework, and the key point here that that we're getting to, that we've been discussing, is the roles, events, and artifacts. So the artifacts that we maintain are the product backlog, which is a single list of all the user stories that the team works on. There's the sprint backlog, which is a derivative of the product backlog, but it's only what you're working on in the 2 weeks or the 1 week. Yeah. A sprint can be anywhere from a week to a month. That's what they prescribe. We have a burn down that shows the progress of the sprint as you're each day. Anytime you move a task to done, then the burn down changes. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like. Then the increment, which is what is the result of the sprint. So each sprint is kind of like a mini project. In the beginning, I was showing you guys that, how smaller projects you would tend to be more successful. Well, we create these 2-week projects, and at the end we have an increment, which is the deliverable.
So, for instance, it might be, your first sprint is to build the login screen and get that login information available, and the increment would be the delivery of the login screen for viewing of the quote customer.
Right, and hopefully we didn't just build a login screen.
Right,
but
hopefully we've got something behind it.
Yeah, and then the definition of done, which is something that is true for every sprint. So you don't add these things. They're not like something that you're gonna deliver. It's things like following best practices, coding practices, whatever they may be. Like in our case, for our one of the things in our definition of done is that it's in staging, in a place where the customer can view it on a website. It's been released and it's working. So what we use is TFS to manage all of our artifacts and our backlog. And forecasting our sprints and monitoring our progress, and it's visible to everybody, the management, all the development team, all the customers. And this is an example of the product backlog, and the product backlog is in an order. From in here you can see from 1 to 9. This is the most important thing that we need to be working on, and it is going to go into sprint 2. If anything goes into sprint 2, it's going there, and it has an effort of 3. And then a description. Okay. Oh, and one other thing. And this is the velocity that was set. So this velocity determines, how much is going to happen in each sprint. So there's 4, 7, 8, 9. These all add up to this velocity, or they're close to the velocity. And that effort is determined in a game that we play in our refinement meetings with planning poker cards that use a variation of the Fibonacci sequence. 1/2, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40, 100. And so the team sits around the table, and we all have a set of these cards that have the Fibonacci sequence in it, and we discuss this user story, this product backlog item, and say, okay, well, this is what we're going to need to do. We're going to have to create this error message that shows up every single time, the user puts in a value that's incorrect. Okay, and 1, 2, 3, vote. And everybody puts up a card, and some people might put up a 1, and some people put up a 5, and some people put up a 3. And so then that starts a discussion of, well, why do you think it's a 5, or why do you think it's a 1? And in the end, we all come to a consensus on what that number should be, and that's the effort. That's the value that we put there. It's how hard, how much effort is it going to take to lift this table? You know, it's not in hours. It's not a time thing. It's how much energy is going to be required to complete it. So we effort out all the product backlog items. Based on the velocity, we can forecast what our sprints are. So that was the backlog. This is the sprint backlog. And you can see in the sprint backlog, this is what we're going to be working on in the increment. And we have the team has agreed to bring in commit to these items right here. And we task out those items. Well, what's it going to take to build this error message? And these tasks are created on the product backlog item, and then the person doing the work estimates the amount of time it's going to take, and he puts that here. And this all happens, the team does this at the very beginning of the sprint. And I'll show you what that gives you.
So what happens if the effort was just miscalculated and they rated it a 3 and it was really a 1? So then you go to this and it takes less time to get to deliver. Less time never happens.
Well, it's a good point. And the answer is that, okay, if it's too much work, then you renegotiate with the product owner and you say, well, maybe we need to split this up and take some of this off the sprint. You know, what we decided what we committed to do is going to take longer. We need to pull that off and put that piece back into the product backlog and only do what we can handle. Or you just don't worry about it. You just leave it alone. Because what you're going to find over time, things average out. You're going to estimate a little high sometimes and a little low sometimes, but over time, your velocity, the amount of effort that you can do in a sprint, is going to average out. You know, so you'll see, like we're averaging out around 25.
David, it takes time to norm. So,
yeah.
And I think that's one of the key things here is like, we didn't just show up and everybody go, hey, this is all a 3 and everything was, and everybody was right. It takes time to norm. I think it took us probably maybe 4 sprints before we are now at the point where when we do the cards, usually nobody's like an outlier. Like everybody's either like one, like we're off by
plus or minus 1.
Plus or minus 1 section. So
yeah.
If it's a 5, somebody could be giving us an 8 and another person give us a 3, but nobody's giving us a 13 and half the team's giving a 5. So it takes time to norm, but once it does norm, that's fine. And on the scenario where you say what happens if you do a 3 and it really was a 1, oh well, you just move on. And if you have extra bandwidth at the end of the sprint, maybe you go pull in another, you see if you can pull in another
small
item.
Piece from the backlog.
You pull another item in from the backlog. If you don't have any time, then frankly your 3 was a 3. You just, it turns out to be okay.
Yeah, that goes back to the notion of empiricism, where you learn from your past experience, and that's how you do this estimation, and that's how you know what to bring in. But it is, Brian's absolutely right. It takes several sprints for the team to start to coalesce and understand what it's going to take the team to get something done.
The points are really relative. It's just the idea is that this is bigger than that.
That's right. Yeah, with the 12 teams that we had at Baker Hughes, some teams, their velocity was 60. Ours was like 40 or something like that, 30 or 40 or something like that. And there were other teams that were even higher than that. That number is relative to the team, not across teams.
I think that one of the first things we had to also kind of do with, in time, come up with what is a 3? Once we figured out what is a 3, like, we never actually defined it. We never actually sat down and everybody said, you know, this is a 3. But over time, the group kind of came around, and we now know what a 3 is. And so we can look at something and go, well, I think that's a 5, an 8, or a 1, based off of that. What we now know is effectively a 3. But it took us a while to kind of, you know, to sit down and go, what is a 3? You know, so
I would expect that changes over time too, as the experience of the team changes and grows.
So far, again, we're new. We're like 6 months in. I don't think it's really altered. Once we kind of start to hit the flow, I don't think we've altered.
I think the team gets better at estimating, but the team starts to figure out what the team can do. And you know, a 3 is always a 3 or a 5. And the idea here, this is all estimation, right? You know, it's like, you know, you're up against a deadline and then you miss your deadline. Well, you know, what we're doing is decomposing the problem down to the smallest bits, and that allows us to be more accurate in our prediction, our forecasting for the future. So this is another view from TFS of our backlog, and you know, these are the items, and you can't read them really. Sprint 4, 5, 6. This is what we've committed to. This is what is done. Over on the right-hand side is the work in progress in hours per person or per role. Like, we have a designer, we have a tester, we have developers, and you can see that of the developers in the capacity, this is how many hours are total left in terms of our capacity.
I have to step out. I'm assuming this is in-house TFS. This is, you guys are running TFS.
Well, you can do it online too.
Yes, you can, but it is somewhat different.
Yeah, as soon as I got in, I installed TFS. That was the first thing I did. I didn't even ask.
Right? You just did it, huh? I love it.
Okay, so these are the roles. The Scrum team, which is composed of the development team, the Scrum Master, and the product owner. The development team, which are the developers, and you could be a tester and a developer. You could be a designer and a developer. It's the people that are doing the work, the Scrum Master and the product owner. These are the events. Backlog refinement is not a by-the-book event, but eventually it'll probably will be. It's one of those meetings that you hold 3 times a week, and this is where you discuss your user stories. You know, the product owner is responsible for creating the user stories, although he can assign the tasks to the developers. And then the development team sits down and they look at the backlog item, the user story, and say, okay, is there enough information for us to get started on this thing? And does it have the right acceptance criteria? You know, and then if it does, then the team can estimate it. They can use the Fibonacci sequence and estimate how long they think that item is going to take. The sprint planning is the event that occurs right before the iteration starts. This is where you commit to the product backlog items that are at the highest level. And then the sprint, of course, the daily Scrum, this is like the most, maligned. It's like, you know, we're Scrum, we have a daily stand-up every day, right? Well, no. And then the sprint review, this is a super important meeting where you bring your customers in and you show them what you've completed. You demonstrate it. This occurs every 2 weeks, and you elicit feedback from them so that so that then the backlog can be adapted to the feedback, and you can, you know, it's like, well, we didn't want it green, we wanted it blue or whatever. And then the retrospective, and this is where everybody gets together and cries. You know, because
I
this
had
is.
to work an extra 8 hours to get that dang thing done. We missed that estimate completely.
That's right. And what can you do to solve the problem? It's a constructive meeting, an important meeting that is, its purpose is to come up with action items to improve your what you guys are doing. Every 2 weeks we come up with an action item. The last action item we came up with was improving our deployment process, which has to do with our references. We're always having trouble getting the references. One programmer gets the code and then checks it in, and then the other guy gets it, and there's something wrong with the references, and we got to fix it. And there's a problem with that. And then deploying it to the websites. We want that to be as smooth as possible. So we created an action item to improve that process. Then the user stories, and I'm sure you guys are all familiar with user stories. This is, it has the basic format. As a help desk operator, I want, to search for my customers by their first name and last name so that it has some reason, has some value. Who wants it? What do you want, and for what purpose? What is the value? And it has a priority, and it's something that's estimatable. We can look at this and say, we can all sit in a room and say, I think this is
that number on there was a priority based on all the other user stories
in the list. Yep. So as some user, I want for some functionality, for some benefit. It's called the value statement. A user story also has acceptance criteria. So if you don't have TFS, you might have note cards. And on one side you have the user story with its value statement and its priority. And then on the other side you have the acceptance criteria. What does it mean to the customer? What are the conditions of satisfaction? The customer's got to tell you, that this is how you reduce the ambiguity. And it's a way for you to demonstrate the end product. It's something that you can use to create tests from, either integration tests or and then I also added this in. This is for creating the user stories. You want them independent, and they can be delivered in a sprint. They're negotiable. They're not a spec, right? You don't write user stories that look like specs. You leave it up to the developer to kind of interpret some aspect of the user story. You give them. They're professionals. We are professionals. We can take something and we can come up with something good. We don't need every little piece, to build this thing. It has a value. It's estimatable. It's testable, and it's small enough, an appropriate size, so that we can get it done in the sprint. And usually they should take you no longer than like 3 days to do a user story. And then this is how the user stories look in TFS. So over here is our value statement. You've got a few notes. Over there is our acceptance criteria. The effort and the priority, a title.
You just earned your keep today, Scott. That helped me a lot right there.
Oh, did it?
Yeah.
Oh.
There's help for you?
Minimal.
Yeah.
There's always help.
So, and we're getting towards the end, so don't fall asleep. Just how do you measure stuff? The burn down is like the most significant thing that we use during the sprint. This was one of our first burn downs. So what you have is this is like the total number of, maybe this wasn't ours, this is somebody else's. This is the total, 250 hours worth of work. You know, so at the beginning of the sprint, you take all of those product backlog items and you create tasks from the backlog items. And on those tasks, the very first day, you know, you sit in this long meeting and you put the number of hours that you create the tasks, and you put the number of hours for each of those tasks right down as far as you can until you guys can get started. And then that adds up to this number right here, 250. And so then you start your work, you know, that day or the next day or whatever. And as you move tasks, I don't know if you noticed on the sprint backlog, but there were different columns. There was a to-do column, there was an in-progress column, and then there was a done column. As you move them to done, then this number drops. It starts in hours, it's dropping over the course of this 2 weeks. And then right here, what do you think happened right here?
Found another task.
Yeah, a bunch of tasks. Yeah. And so then they added more tasks, and it crossed this ideal line. And then they kept working, and then what happens right here down at the bottom? They didn't finish everything.
They just cut it off.
Well, that's the end of the sprint. It's a time boxed thing. You know, you got 2 weeks, and you bust your butt to get it done in 2 weeks, and hopefully you're working at a. Hopefully you're not busting your butt. Hopefully you're working at some sustainable level. And then this is actually what our velocity looks like. So sprint 1, I barely got enough buy-in. You know, this was me completing something done, and then we were working the team up, and we got more work into the sprint, and then we're starting to get the whole team together as working, and we're committing to user stories. And then this, on our 4th sprint, you know, we had committed to 21 effort points, and at this point in the sprint, we had put 1 into the done column. 1 product backlog item was done with an effort of 1, and then the blue shows you what's left to do.
How many folks do you have on your Scrum team?
Brian,
6.
B6. Yeah. So you know, we're just barely at the Scrum level.
We have a unique, like, I have a business analyst in there, and I have a system admin in there too, because a lot of my goal here was to get more visibility outside of my department that we are doing stuff, and that there are all these projects that may not be company-wide, but
you've been requested to do.
But we're doing them, because we have to do them, and I'm always like, well, how come you guys aren't? And I'm like, well, don't you know all these other things we do? And they're like, no. So we started to put them in here so that we could show that there was more going on. You know, so it's a kind of a weird combination of not just a software development project.
But it doesn't have to be just software. Scrum is a framework. You can apply it theoretically to, you know, any project that
you can apply it to building a building.
You could. And one of the books I read several years ago was called Agile for Dummies. It's like this yellow dummies book. And the guy, one of the things that he was super proud of was that he used the Scrum process to write the whole book.
Wait, that's a Scrum of 1, man.
I know. And really, you're supposed to have at least 4 people on your Scrum team. That's like 3 people, I think, is enough. Okay. And then, so this is important. This is another way we measure our backlog. And what it's showing you is what we can forecast. How far out can we forecast? It's kind of hard to see again, but the green is what we've done. We're done with that. And the blue is what we've committed to. Now, this is an old one, and so this is what's actually in the sprint, okay? And then the approved, this light blue section right here, are things that we've approved, that we've said we've estimated, and we approved for future sprints. So we've got about, I don't know, 20 effort points estimated. And if you think about what our velocity was, we had, at that time, we had enough to do for the next sprint. So we could estimate out for 2 weeks. But now we're getting out to about 8 weeks. So
Is that part of that refinement, that backlog refinement that you were talking about?
Yeah.
That's how that's coming about then?
Yeah.
that's right.
You guys look through that on a regular basis and say, all right, now we know enough to understand this user story.
Right. That's where I'm probably driving Scott the most, nuts right now, to be honest with you, because that's where I step in and I'm wearing this
Dual hat.
odd functional manager, product owner hat, where I go into the refinement meeting and try to guide and move.
Switch back and forth.
And I try to be more product owner than functional manager, but at some point I can't just throw the functional manager completely out, so I have to.
And that's why he doesn't belong in
Right.
But unfortunately, it's what we got, so
Yeah.
he's stuck with me and he's
Yeah,
smiling.
it's a hybrid, but it's a reasonable hybrid in your
there.
environment.
That's exactly right. So, I guess.
Just curious, in that model though, do you ever get any pushback from the user community saying, you're the product owner, right? So, and do they ever come back and say, hey, how come it's taking so long? What's going on here?
Since we've started this, I think they're seeing the benefit much more, and they're so far. No, I haven't. I was getting a lot of flack before, and one of the reasons why I brought Scott in is because I was getting a lot of flack because I was trying to be the product manager, product owner, project manager, functional manager, and a developer, and I had so many hats that I was doing none of them well. And so the team was failing. Just, the fact it was like, it got to a point where I had a conversation with my boss and she goes, well, when do you think you're going to be done with that? And I said, I really don't know why we keep having this conversation, because whatever date I give you, I'm not going to make. And she's like, what do you mean? I said, we're in a mess. I won't make it. You want me to give you a date? I'll give you a date, it'll be wrong. I can keep giving you a bad date, or you can let us do Scrum and we'll figure it out, and eventually in 6 months, 8 months, we'll be able to give you a better estimate. But right now, I can't. And that's really where I was. Like, we were literally it was like that, I love the sound of deadlines as they go whizzing by.
Yeah.
That's where we were. And so, yeah, we got pushback before. And I guess where we're still getting pushback is, though my boss will tell us every day, oh, I love your Scrum process. I'm behind your Scrum process. By the way, when are you going to have that done? And then we're like, well, we don't know because we don't have all the requirements yet. But I need a date. Well, I can't give you one.
Yeah, but it puts the onus back in the proper place. If we don't know what it is that we need to build, we can't tell you how long it's going to take.
And that's the hard part for you guys, though, is to be able to
That's
say
the reason
that.
I was asking about the dynamics. If he's the product owner, that onus should really be on the product owner.
Yep. Yep.
But we need the customer. If the customer says we need this piece of functionality, and they just this big black box, but they're not willing to spend the time with us, or if there is not the time to spend with us, then we can't give them what if they can't give us what we need, and we can't give them what they want to know, and we should not even try. It's exactly, these deadlines whiz right by you because, hey, how far along do you think you are? Well, I don't know, 20%, 10%.
It's easy to throw out a percentage.
I don't, the only way to do it is, the way to do it is using this empirical process where you decompose things, you estimate things, and then you look back on your previous history to determine what your velocity is. Ours is like 23 or something like that. and you estimate those things, we know how much of this work we can bring in for the next sprint. And we've been pretty good lately about getting things, and that's the other thing, we're becoming predictable.
Which helps the customer side beyond Brian. Because that predictability then at least gives them some comfort that you guys are on a path and on a trajectory that it's going to be successful.
Right. And like I said, we're estimated out now for about 8 weeks, I think, 6-8 weeks,
I think we almost, yeah.
And so we know what we can be doing in 8 weeks. We can say, okay, this is where we're most likely going to be. If nothing, we don't change the priority, or something else becomes visible.
Barring unknown unknowns.
But we're a lot more sure of our estimates than we would be if we weren't doing something like this.
Yep.
And then, okay, so this is it. There's never enough time to do it right the first time, but there's always enough time to do it over. And then this is all the stuff I read to prepare.
Awesome. That's awesome. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So, Scott, you heard my belly aching earlier.
Yeah.
Let me give you an example of what the real world's out there doing right now that supports what you were saying, that, oh yeah, we have a stand-up every morning, so we're Scrum. We're working with this company out of Oregon, and I said, well, we're interested in an agile development process. Oh yeah, we develop agile. I said, great, we'll start producing the user stories for you. And there was silence on the other end of the phone. And somebody said, well, what do you mean? That should have been my first clue right there, to walk away from that. Because it's like, you claim to be an agile development company, and you don't know what a user story is. And so,
Yeah.
And it's been the same type of stuff the whole time.
Scott doesn't have it in here, but on our acceptance criteria, we attempt to use the given when then sentence. So we have the as a, I want, so that's user story, and then acceptance criteria are given a scenario, when this is true, then do this, right?
Yeah.
And so we use 2 structured sentences, so that it's easy to read. They follow the same. It took the team a little while to kind of get the GWT down, but I think they're now seeing the benefit of the GWT, because they go in, every product backlog on the left-hand side has an as a, and on the right-hand side has a given when then.
Yeah, see, I was serious when you pulled up that chart and started showing, pulled up the TFS screen and started showing what the numbers meant. It began to make sense to me, because I've been struggling with the TFS side of this.
Oh yeah.
Trying to get into my head. Now, I have way too small a team to do a lot of the, quote, Scrum type stuff.